Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and just as Nas said, this is the Fabargo Dungeons and Rap, and fake Kenders do not make it out. Today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we're going to talk about power in 2022. Because Dungeons and Dragons is in the middle of it, all right? Dungeons and Dragons, man, it is hitting its stride. It is doing long, fast steps, and it is putting ground, it is actually putting more ground between itself and the entire rest of the tabletop role-playing game industry. And because it real power, real billions of dollars, real money, real impact, real cultural change swirls around Dungeons and Dragons because people know what it is, unlike any other tabletop role-playing game that exists, right? Like actual regular muggles, not just D&D sphere people, but like regular people know what D&D is. And I don't know if that, and I'm beginning to think that ain't the case for a single other tabletop role-playing game in the world, right? And this Elon Musk buying Twitter, this is huge, and it is going to impact Dungeons and Dragons very, very directly, right? And impacted significantly. Okay, so let's talk about this. This is a growing concern for Dungeons and Dragons. Actually, the only concern is that trust and believe. Elon Musk buying Twitter is going to change Dungeons and Dragons. And by a factor of 10% to 80%. This is very directly going to impact Dungeons and Dragons. That is my prediction. That is my humble opinion. And now I'm going to tell you why. Okay. So first of all, I'm going to break it down. This is why Elon Musk bought, in my humble opinion, this is why Elon Musk bought Twitter. All right? It's a power move. It is a power move. It is the power move of 2022 by far. Okay? First of all, you don't think Twitter matters? You ain't paying attention. Twitter silenced a U.S. president. And when they did that, they came for the throat of the U.S. government, right? And the U.S. government don't play. They do not like that. I don't give two figs about Donald Trump, but President Trump, that's my president, right? He was your president too, if you in the U.S. Everything I'm talking about all is now is U.S. specific, right? And you know what? Ain't no corporation in the world supposed to silence a U.S. president. I don't care what he was saying. That ain't right, right? That just you forgot hierarchy, right? And that's the issue. Twitter forgot hierarchy. They got too big for their britches. They silenced the U.S. president, and the world came for them, right? And guess who was on top of the king of the hill? Guess who was king of the hill when it came to money and understanding? It was Elon Musk. Bezos is there are international stories in the news that Bezos is furious because he realizes Musk figured it out, right? President Donald Trump rewrote the presidency with Twitter, right? He leapfrogged the entire media, went straight to the people, right? Constantly, multiple times a day, and said, I do not need the media, and you don't need them either, right? This is all about power, right? So Elon Musk rolls up, right? Two things. He realized Twitter is power. Revolutions in multiple countries have been spurred, boosted, facilitated, infrastructured on Twitter. Twitter is power, right? So it is big. Here's the second one. You're going to get this only here. This is a J. Scott Garibay original. I ain't hear nobody saying this, but this is real. Elon Musk, in my opinion, knows that electronic cars are trash done finished, right? In order for them to go, you need cheap batteries. There ain't never going to be cheap batteries. Everybody figured this out, right? Everybody oil you have to dig up in from the ground. Guess what? Every battery, you got to dig rocks out of the ground. It's the same thing. And digging stuff out of the ground, you know what the actual cost of that is? It'd be blood. I'm telling you, man, we've learned this lesson, right? And ain't no cheap batteries coming for these electronic cars. And without electronic cars, they are toys for the wealthy at best. And I think Elon knows it, right? So the reality is, this Twitter move is huge. It is the biggest power move of 2022, bar none, right? And this is where the billionaires play. where are we at with Dungeons & Dragons? Guess what? Okay? First of all, Dungeons & Dragons' fate is very much decided on Twitter. You think I'm wrong? Go look at Gary Gygax. He got wrecked, absolutely wrecked in 2021, right? He's like, oh, I have these plans. Everybody at Twitter said, your plans are finished. You are finished, done, shut it, go. And he was out. Twitter wrecked him, right? That's the son of Gary Gygax. Twitter threw him away like a crumpled, finished soda cup, right? Like, just destroyed him, right? And every company he was connected to, right? You do not play when it comes to Twitter. Twitter is power, and it impacts Dungeons & Dragons. And guess what? I am actually starting to think that the real reason that you do not ever hear WotC talking about Gary Gygax is his kids, his wives, the people he created, right, or that he was deeply connected to, they still around, right? And the reality is none of them have a robust, healthy relationship with Dungeons & Dragons, right? They're either bitter and frustrated about it, they either don't care about it, people don't know them, and when they try to get to know them, it doesn't end well, right? Like, the Gygax family, Gygax cared deeply about D&D. I'm not sure a single one of his wives or children cared two figs for D&D at the end of the day, right? Like, I think they just got other things, and that, you know what, that's totally okay. Some of them did care and tried to do something, and Twitter decided, no, you finished, right? And Twitter has the power to do that, right? Now, here's the other thing. It is very, very clear that Wizards of the Coast, they tweet on Twitter, and they listen to Twitter, and they respond to Twitter, right? Why? Why do they care more about Twitter than Facebook, Instagram, Reddit combined? Because the smartest people in the world are on Twitter, right? You cannot be tier 1 intellect. You cannot be on Twitter for long without tier one intellect. And the reason why is you will get wrecked, right? There's a bunch of journos and Ivy Leaguers and academics and like deep in the weeds activists who have actually read books, right? Like, it's readers, it's thinkers, it's philosophers, and ain't nobody else on there. And if you roll up there without tier 1 intellect, you ain't gonna last long, right? That's just a fact. And now there's even a button on there to downvote you. That might disappear soon, right? Like, as soon as Musk takes Twitter from woke to based, right? And that's the next. Twitter about to go from woke to based, right? Now, Wizards of the Coast listens to Twitter, and that ain't going to stop. I'm telling you that right now. Everybody thinks that Twitter's going somewhere because Elon bought it. You can forget that noise. Twitter is it, right? And the reason why is it ain't got no competitors, right? The reality is there's 10,000 journos in America alone, guaranteed, on Twitter, spouting news, spouting their opinions, spouting everything, right? Twitter decides who directs movies and who doesn't, right? Like, Twitter has real power, and it draws journos, it draws intellect, it draws tier 1 intellectuals to it like moth to a flame, right? And guess what? At the macro level, this is why this all matters for D&D, okay, for Dungeons & Dragons. Dungeon Masters are tier 1 intellects. You know why? Because there's 7,000 pages of canon for D&D 5e alone, right? So if you a rank amateur newbie just running D&D 5e, you've already read 1,000 to 7,000 pages. Guess what? Tier 2 intellectuals don't read 1,000 to 7,000 pages of rules. So D&D is just tier 1 intellectuals. And at the macro level, the Venn diagram between Dungeon Masters and Twitterers is almost a complete eclipse, right? They overlap so much, there might be a tiny little rind on the edge, right? So the reality is, when it comes to Twitter, right, Dungeons & Dragons' fate is very much entwined with it. And many of the books that we have, Session 0, dropped into Tasha for no other reason in the world other than Twitter. I guarantee you that, right? Inclusion for the races, Twitter, right? Candlekeep Mystery, Journey into the Radiant Citadel would not exist without Twitter, right? Like, it's Twitter and D&D are intimately twined like two metal braids, and they are wrapped around each other, corded, right? This is a very real thing, right? And the reality is, when Twitter's about to go from woke to based, that is going to be a very, very, very big change. I'm not positive what the changes are for Dungeons & Dragons coming up, but I'm positive that changes for Dungeons & Dragons are coming up, right? Do you see how, like, and boy, I'll tell you, this week, everybody talking about Elon Musk buying Twitter. And get this, right? I gave you 2 reasons why Elon Musk bought Twitter. Here's the third. Here's my prediction. He's going to unsilence Trump. He's going to give a U.S. president his voice back, right? And I'm not saying whether that's good or bad. I'm saying that's power, right? And here's the kicker. D&D Twitter is a thing. OSR Twitter? Is it? I don't know. Like, see, because the reality is D&D has reached a point where it is a hair's breadth away from... It is deeply... It's very clearly connected to American politics, American money, American culture, right? You think I'm wrong? Stranger Things 4 is about to come up. It's going to be one of the biggest streaming events in the world. $30 million an episode, right? D&D's right in the center. Right in the center. D&D is part of American culture, American politics, and if you don't see that, you are squeezing your eyes shut, man. You are blind. It is a very real thing. We got a multi-billion-dollar... We have a movie that costs hundreds of millions of dollars that could be a multi-billion-dollar IP, right? Marvel's MCU changed the world. If you don't see that, it's very real, right? Right now, Disney is literally going into skirmish with the U.S. government. That's where the MCU lies, right? If D&D blows up, you got a multi-billion-dollar intellectual property. Dungeons and Dragons is a hair's breadth away from real American power. It is adjacent, and no other tabletop role-playing in the world is even remotely close. Well, that's my opinion. Love to hear your thought. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.